Sorry, everyone, that my Mandarin is not as good, so I'm going to be leading my presentation in English, but feel free to, throughout the presentation, add any questions to the chat, and at the end, we'll go through them together. So you know a little bit about my background, but I'm going to go into a bit more detail in terms of my personal academic journey, a bit more about my philosophy and values and who I am and how I've approached different decisions throughout my academic career. So first and foremost, in my early education, this is a bit of a summary. So starting in kindergarten when I was 2 years old, all the way into grade 3, I was at Toronto Montessori School. So for those of you who are in the GTA, you might be familiar with it. And then in grade 4, I went into the gifted program at Aurora Senior Public School, which was my local gifted school. And then afterward, I applied into the University of Toronto schools, also known as UTS, where I attended high school. And I followed my older brother, who was 3 years older than me there. And then afterwards, I went to the US to study at the University of Pennsylvania and their Wharton School. And I studied in management, entrepreneurship, and innovation with a bachelor's degree in economics. And then afterward, I went into being a marketing lead at Google Canada. And now I am a Schwarzman Scholar and will be attending Tsinghua Daxue and Tsinghua University in Beijing this August. So that's a bit of an overview of my academic career. And now we're going to go into each part bit by bit and kind of explain my overall journey a bit more in depth. So from an early age, I'm sure many of you can relate, my parents really emphasized a value on education. They placed a lot of value in putting me in the right environments so that I would gain the right values and skills that I needed to succeed in life. And so I think back on my education very fondly, and I think it all really started at Montessori. So for those of you who aren't familiar with Montessori, it is a style of teaching that really aims to cultivate this sense of curiosity and love of learning and resourcefulness in kids. So when you go into a classroom, there aren't lessons, but there are a lot of different activities and children can choose what they want to do for the day. So whether they want to cut apples or do a math puzzle, or if they want to go write for a bit, they're really encouraged to kind of lead their own journey. And so they naturally grow up to be more independent and leaders. And so this really translated into who I became as a student, but also generally as a person. I really enjoyed my freedom and the opportunity to explore a lot of different things as I wanted. I really enjoyed variety in my education, a sense of independence, and that allowed me to really own myself as a leader because I felt confident, I felt curious, and I felt empowered to create opportunities for myself from the resources around me. And so going into elementary school, so this is grade 4 to grade 8, when I was at Aurora Senior, I actually just engaged in a lot of different activities without my parents pushing me. I was just someone who's really excited to meet new people and try new things. So I was involved in basketball, volleyball, badminton, chess, math, writing, the yearbook club. I just enjoyed trying a lot of different things. And I even founded the student government at school. So I knew that, I was interested in spirit days and my school didn't have a group that organized them. And so I volunteered, I raised my hand, and then eventually became my school's first president. And so going from elementary school into high school, in grade 7, I was actually applying to UTS, but was rejected. And so at the time, my older brother was at UTS. And so I knew about the school and I knew that I wanted to go there. And then in grade 9, I reapplied and I was accepted. And I think the lesson there is to not give up. If you know that you want to go somewhere, you shouldn't be discouraged. There's always more opportunities down the line to reapply, and just maintain a sense of persistence. And then going into my high school years, this is really when I continued all those values that I talked about earlier. So this sense of, taking initiative in terms of creating my own opportunities, a sense of exploration and curiosity, trying a lot of different things. And I started to own in on what really excited me. So if I were to reduce it into kind of three main buckets or three main themes, I would say, in retrospect, in high school, I was really good at creating my own opportunities. And by this, I meant that not only did I participate in school activities, so things that were parts of clubs or in class, but I was really excited about learning in environments that were outside of class. And so two things that have always been true to my personality are that I really enjoy meeting new people, and I really enjoy being in new environments. And I find that really exciting and a different way to learn outside of class rather than a teacher teaching you. You're kind of learning it yourself. And so I wanted to go out into the world and learn about new things. And so I knew that I was curious, for example, about politics. And so while my school didn't have a politics class, or they didn't have, a politics club, I was able to actually send emails to my local politician and ask if they'd be interested in having me as an intern to volunteer. And so I created my own opportunity to try something new. And that was in grade 9. And I decided that I actually didn't enjoy it so much, but it was something that, I had to try myself to learn. And then, the same thing happened when I thought that I had, an interest in chemistry. I decided that, I was really enjoying my chemistry class at school, but wanted to explore it a bit more in a different setting. And so again, took the initiative to just send emails to different professors at the University of Toronto, introducing myself and saying that I was a student who might be interested in helping out and learning more about chemistry. And eventually, after sending dozens of emails, a few got back to me, and I ended up volunteering with a professor for a few months before, again, deciding that it wasn't for me. So I guess I would encourage you to think about what opportunities are available to you, but also if you have interests, to not be discouraged by that and to think about the bigger picture and create those opportunities for yourself. Another lesson from my high school years is to really utilize the school resources at the same time. I think a lot of us are privileged to attend really great schools. And we can learn a lot from older students at our schools. So the activities that I was participating in at school were Model United Nations, speech and debate, and eventually DECA. And all of these things I heard about through friends, whether, they were just going during lunch and asked me to tag along, or something that my teacher maybe brought up in class. And so just stay curious and kind of open to trying different things, and you never know what will work out or what you'll be interested in. Also at school, I was really engaged in my community. I loved, spirit days and interacting with my peers. So I was also a house literary representative. And for those of you who don't know what that means, it's kind of like Hogwarts, where there are different houses at my high school. And so I was, the blue house, which is Ravenclaw, but at UTS it was called Cody. And I organized events for students. So I really enjoyed that. And then also, I often made a point to use all of the different academic supports at school as well. So for example, I would often use tutoring during lunchtime because math was never my strong suit. I didn't personally go to math after school classes, but a lot of my peers did. And I came in grade 9, while many of my peers had came in grade 7. And so I was behind in math. So I had a lot of catching up to do. And rather than, hiring an external tutor or going to external math classes, as, some of my peers did, I actually really just utilized my school resources. So I used my tutors over lunchtime, which were free through my school from older students. And I went to kind of math parties, which were basically office hours that my teachers held after school. And I would do my homework there and ask them questions. So make sure to take advantage of your school resources and don't be shy about asking for help. I think that a lot of the time these schools do have opportunities like that, and it's just on you to really take advantage of them and make the most of them, because otherwise they go to waste. And then I guess the final thing that I look back on fondly was that I really found a way to create and find these unique leadership opportunities. And so, you can be a leader in your school, but you can also look for opportunities to kind of expand beyond what's available within your school. So how can you be a leader, at a regional, at a national, at an international level? And so, in my intro, they had mentioned this, but I was a DECA provincial officer. So that meant that I was organizing all the competitions for everyone across Ontario, which was over 10,000 students at the time. And I got to travel to different cities and meet other provincial officers from the US and from, other countries. And I thought that was really exciting. And so that was also a really rewarding experience. And then another thing, two summer activities that I did, 2 summer programs. In grade 10, I went to Shad Valley, which is now called Shad. And it's a STEM program where Canadian high school students are placed across Canada at university campuses for a month. And they take classes and they create a business proposal. So they basically become mini entrepreneurs at these university campuses and are, eating in the cafeterias, taking college classes. It's really fun. And one thing that I was able to do through that was eventually make the business that won the Shad Valley National Competition, and then spin that into a startup business with my friends called Visible. And the business was a line of LED turn signal cyclist jackets. So it was a jacket with turn signals on the back so that you could see cyclists in the dark. And then after we created that business idea, we actually eventually in the summer tried to build it out into a business just for fun. But we reached out to patent lawyers, we reached out to local startup incubators, and all of that experience I wrote about in my application for university, which obviously was, I think, compelling for a business school because it showed that I was taking initiative, creating my own opportunities, utilizing resources, and again, creating unique leadership opportunities where I could shine that other people wouldn't necessarily have. And then finally, I was a Canada Youth Ambassador. And so through a program, I was able to go to China and visit multiple different cities in China with different government officials from Canada, learn about the city, learn about different industries, meet with business and political leaders, and represent Canada in China. And so I think because that was a relatively special leadership opportunity, it really allowed me to shine and stand out when I was writing about it in my application. So it was kind of like a special sauce that I was able to use to distinguish myself and, define like, what am I interested in and who am I versus different applicants. I think this is a good time for me to also insert a little bit of, my personal philosophy towards education, towards life, and how education should fit into life. So obviously, when I'm explaining my life course, it seems relatively straightforward. But at the time, it was really me just experimenting and trying a lot of things and not knowing exactly how things would work out. So, for example, when I went to volunteer with a politician, I didn't know if I would like it or not. But then I tried something else. And then I tried chemistry and I didn't like that either. But then I went to DECA and that worked out. And then I really pursued that and kind of built that into a path because I found that I liked speaking, I liked traveling, I liked meeting new people, and I was good at it too. And so when you think about your life, depending on what age you're at right now, I would think about it as multiple, branches, and you never stop growing or learning or building. And there are multiple opportunities to continue in the past or in the future. And to never think that, one door is closed forever. For example, like I applied to UTS in grade 7 and they got rejected and then reapplied in grade 9. So again, I guess I could summarize my high school experience into 3 main lessons. The first is give yourself the opportunity to try many different things and then follow your strengths and interests. It is, I think, really important to know yourself. And part of knowing yourself is just trying out a lot of things. and getting a taste for a variety of different activities and environments. And then allowing yourself to kind of devote yourself to where you're good at and kind of own in on that. Another thing that I would encourage you to do is to not narrow down your passions too early, because you might find new and creative ways to apply them. So while I talked about my activities like DECA and Shad Valley, on the side, I had interests in videography and travel. And so those were also large motivators for how I interacted both in school, but also in my extracurriculars. And it made it a lot more interesting, and it made me a more well-rounded person. And it also made me a more compelling applicant when I was competing for leadership positions or for these programs, because they got to see that I was creatively applying my passions in new and unique ways to me. So for example, I loved videography, which is like filming videos. And so for school assignments, I would always create video essays instead of written essays. I would film videos for DECA Ontario's social media channel and create webinars where I got to interview different business people. I was using video to film our product and do different product demos for Shad Valley, and also film promotional videos for House. So just try a lot of different things, see what you enjoy, and don't necessarily think that it needs to be like a productive hobby for it to enrich who you are or, you know, help you in the future. You never know what unique and creative ways you'll be able to reapply those passions. And the second that I would say is really don't be afraid to take initiative. I think I don't want everything, you know, in your education to be oriented towards university applications. I think it should be more about building a sense of self and, you know, cultivating your interests and curiosity. But I definitely think that taking initiative can lead you into opportunities that you might not have heard of or thought of before. And it can be really exciting. So like all the things that I look back on in high school, for example, like DECA provincial officer and also my Canada Youth Ambassadorship, were things that I had to put a little bit more effort to look and see what was out there and create those and, you know, email people to see if they'd be willing to have me. But that really creates a lot of really interesting and unique opportunities that will enrich your life, I think. So don't be afraid to take initiative and create projects and, you know, think outside the box for how you might want to build your own sense of education. And then finally, I would encourage you to build strong relationships with a couple of teachers and advisors. Again, there are very different ways to approach, you know, life as many different ways as there are people. But for me, people and mentors have always been a really critical part of my education. I love discussing ideas with teachers, and I like to have kind of like a panel of people that I go to when I have tough decisions in my life or want a second opinion. And so I've really invested in mentors and teachers who have guided me throughout my time. So for example, in high school, I was really close with my English teacher, and not only in class would we talk about materials, but when I read books for fun or saw a poem that I really enjoyed because I like poetry, I would talk to him about it after class or during his office hours. And then we built a really strong relationship to the point where he wrote me a really wonderful and kind reference letter, which I think probably helped a lot in my university application. And more importantly, I still have a really good relationship with him now, where he like gives me advice on what I might want to do in my career or with a scholarship. And so I think it's always important to think about in your life, who are those people that you can go to for advice? You know, obviously your parents, but people who might also be in the fields that you're interested in, who are older students maybe, or mentors and advisors in different ways. So now I'm going to go into kind of the US university application process, because coming from Canada, it wasn't, you know, the majority who was going to the US. It was a very deliberate decision. And so walking through that process and also kind of my thinking behind it might be helpful for some of you. So with US university applications, the reason I decided to go to the US was because one, my parents had always, you know, wanted me to go to the best schools, and the US has really great programs. And two, my brother had gone to the US as well, and he was a really large mentor in my life. And so I knew that he enjoyed his time at Columbia University in New York. And so I kind of had that ambition for myself from an early age as well. One thing that I found really helpful was my family took a US university tour when my brother was applying. So I got to visit all the different campuses across the Northeast, from Harvard to Yale to Columbia to Princeton to Penn. And I got really excited to kind of see where I might be going, take a tour, sit in the classes, learn about the different programs and kind of majors. And I learned a lot through that. So if you have the chance, I would encourage you to do that as well. If you're thinking about going to the US, it's also just a really great resource to understand what you're applying to and kind of tailoring your application to different schools and where you might fit. The other reasons why I went to the US had to do more so with, the structure of the programs. So as I mentioned earlier in my presentation, I've always been someone who likes to try a lot of different things and explore a lot of different passions. And so for me, liberal arts was really important. And the opportunity to, again, learn about, business, but also maybe art history and religion and psychology, and have a really multidisciplinary approach to my education. I also think in the US, there's a bit more of a work-life balance emphasis. And so I've always been someone who really invests in my social life and my community. And that's something that a lot of US schools emphasize through their campus life and their clubs and the way that students interact with each other in the dorm setting. And also, the biggest reason I think people apply to the US is just because there's a lot of devoted resources. So there's going to be smaller classrooms, there's going to be more books, more notable teachers, more supports in terms of tutoring, etc. And as someone who historically has been very resourceful and enjoys taking advantage of all the opportunities provided to me, I thought that at the US universities, I would therefore be able to do better because I knew already how to take advantage of the resources. And then so in terms of my timeline and how I began to approach applying to the US, I started preparing quite early. I think it's good to start thinking about if you want to apply to the US, because in grade 10, you'll need to start kind of getting your courses together and start thinking about what tests you want to take, etc. And so I started preparing for tests and courses in early grade 11, but also a little bit into end of grade 10. And I also started taking AP courses. So at school, I took 5 AP courses: biology, chemistry, physics, English, and US history. But eventually I only took 1 AP exam, which was biology. And so if you're at an IB, you should also be taking like challenging courses through IB. Or if you don't have any of those programs, I think they just want to see that you're challenging yourself and taking difficult courses that interest you. And then I took my SAT in grade 11 spring, but in fact, I didn't feel like the SAT was a score that I was proud of. And so I decided to do my ACT and eventually got a 35 out of 36. And I found the ACT a lot more suitable for my kind of strengths. And so you can think about that too. And then in grade 11 to 12, I started preparing my essays. So the summer between grade 11 and 12, I started drafting essays, thinking about kind of how I would want to frame my application and what stories I wanted to tell about who I was and why I wanted to go to the US and different schools in particular. And then in terms of where I applied to 5 top US schools. I applied to Yale, Harvard, Princeton, Wharton, and Brown. And then 4 in Canada. I applied to Queen's, U of T, Western, and McGill. And then throughout the process, I worked closely with my guidance counselor and English teacher to review my application materials and essays and make sure that everything, conveyed who I was as a person and was authentic to kind of my strengths and why I should be a student at these schools. So for those of you who don't know about the US application itself, this is a bit of a breakdown. There's this thing called the Common Application, which is basically one package that you send to each of the schools in the US that you're applying to. And this consists of a personal essay, which has a prompt that changes every year, but it mostly goes around, tell us a time when you were a leader, or tell us about a challenge you overcame, something like that, just to see who you are as a person and tell a story and how you think. And then secondary essays focus mostly on schools. So for example, Yale might have one saying like, why Yale or why Harvard? And then you have to write those essays per school. And then they'll ask you to list your extracurricular activities. So the number of hours spent on each per week and a bit of a description. So this is when you really showcase your leadership abilities and the different interests you might have outside of your essay. And then also your awards. So for example, I would put, my DECA competitions or different awards that I got for sports, things like that. Your summer activities, so like programs you participated in, and brief description, and then 3 teacher recommendations. So I had one from my math teacher, English teacher, and my guidance counselor. And these don't necessarily need to be aligned with what you're applying for. So if you're applying for biology, you don't necessarily need to have one from your biology teacher. Or if you're applying to, languages, you don't need to have one from your language teacher. It's more so to have a teacher who has seen you and your personality and the qualities that you have and can speak to you highly. So the best case is someone that knows you very well and who's rooting for you and can be your cheerleader. In terms of general common application advice, I would say start during the summer on your personal essay. The more time you give yourself, the more time you can formulate your narrative and who you are. Get an English teacher, guidance counselor, and peers to revise it. The more people you have look at it, I think there's probably diminishing returns. So there's don't get them to look at it too much that you lose your personal voice, but also make sure that they're checking to see that, one, they can see a clear picture of you in your essay, and 2, that, grammar, etc. are good. And then I would say think about your letter recommenders early. So from the beginning of high school, I've been kind of cultivating really good relationships with different teachers. And that wasn't intentionally, but it really did help. And so the more you can think about, again, who will be your mentors and advisors and who will speak to you highly, the more helpful it'll be in this application process. Show that you're in a leadership role. So again, how are you standing out? How do you differentiate yourself from other applicants? It's important to have kind of a specialty. So you're not someone who's like kind of good at a lot of things. They want to see that you meet a threshold academically across your tests, and that, you're a well-rounded person, but that you really shine brightly in one area. And I think for me, that was in business, and kind of like my entrepreneurship interests. And then it's important to dedicate your time to a few activities than to pick up a lot of different ones. So in the beginning, so grade 10 and like grade 9, etc., definitely try out a lot of different things. But in grade 11 and 12, that's kind of when you want to start focusing in on what your passions are, and building, I guess, your resume. So, whether that be competitions, awards, or like leadership roles and positions, those are things to think about. So an example of this is my own application. So there are kind of 3 main categories or buckets that you might consider. The first is where you kind of shine. What is your special sauce? What differentiates you from the rest? For me, it was because I was an entrepreneur, I was a startup founder, a Canada Youth Ambassador, and a DECA provincial officer. And then in the summers, these are kind of the activities that I did. I didn't really mention my grade 9 summer because, again, it was me just exploring. But in grade 10 and 11, I really used those as inspiration in my personal essays, to describe, kind of my leadership style, different challenges that I faced, and highlight my experience in that way. And then in terms of kind of my stats, I had a high academic average. I took challenging classes. I had a 35 out of 36 on my ACTs. And I took 2 SAT subject tests, which I believe are optional now, but it might change next year. And so the way that I would think about your application is grades are a threshold to be met, but they will not win you, like a spot at these universities. What they're really looking for is kind of your extracurriculars. And so now going in a bit more into how my experience at Wharton went and what extracurriculars I was involved in then. Again, I really enjoyed the liberal arts curriculum. Something about me is that I've always known I really enjoy being in new environments and meeting new people. And so I use those to my full advantage and use the resources at Penn to kind of cultivate those interests. In freshman year, I went to Beijing with the Harvard Summer School Program, and I got to travel and meet new people and studied the Chinese language and go to Inner Mongolia and research technology advancement there. And then in sophomore year, I studied religious studies in Thailand and was able to travel with my classmates there as well. And so a very diverse set of interests. Even though I was majoring in economics, I got to try all of these different things and learn a lot and travel and meet new people. And that's, some of my fondest memories to date. In terms of clubs and leadership, obviously I continued to be involved in my community and, want to engage with my peers. And so I joined the Wharton Undergraduate Consultant Club, which I was president of in my junior year. I also placed first in the Wharton Case competition internationally. I was treasurer of a Phil and Mathian Literary Society, which was more for fun and just to meet people. And I was also a resident advisor. So I basically lived with in the dorms with a floor of residents, hosting events and dinners and conversations and just building a nice community together. And then also I didn't fence before Penn, but what's interesting about these universities is they have so many resources. And so I got the opportunity to learn fencing for free and I joined the fencing team. And then after university, I continued to explore and, ask myself what I enjoy, what I don't enjoy. And I would encourage you to remember that, your life is a continuous journey, very similar to the chart that I showed earlier. And so always ask yourself, what are your professional and personal dreams? And, how can you kind of explore opportunities to make the most of life? And for me, I wanted to go back to China and again, be in a new environment, meet new people. And so that's why I'm off to the Schwarzman Scholars Program, which is a free master's at Tsinghua in global affairs, where I'm excited to continue my education, but also, continue to explore the passions that have always driven me from, kindergarten up until now, which is a love of learning and curiosity and just trying new things and making the most of resources available to me. So now I will take any questions. Thank you for sitting through my presentation. I know that the chat has been going and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Okay, thank you, Heather. 有请我们的麦克老师和我们的这个 Heather 给大家进行一个现场的这个答疑环节。有问题的这个学生和家长可以把问题敲出来，我们会给大家解答你们所有的问题，好吧？谢谢。有请我们的麦克老师，麦克老师也是我们藤校的这个项目的一个创始人啊，有请麦克老师。
谢谢大家。我看我们有好多这个问题。Heather, can you, there's one question that how useful is DACA to university? University application.
Yeah, so DECA is only one activity. And I would say it depends on what your interests are and what narrative/story you're trying to communicate to the university. So if you're very interested in business or public speaking or entrepreneurship, then DECA can be a really strong asset because it allows you to showcase those skills and develop and learn. But if you're interested, for example, in chemistry and research, then there's a very different set of activities that you can explore that would enhance your application that way.
I guess it's more like a do a little bit of introduction of fundamental. What is DECA?
Yeah, good question. So DECA is a case competition for high schoolers. And so essentially what you get is a prompt or a business challenge. For example, you have to start a new business to sell scarves to 35-year-old females in Minneapolis. What are your considerations? And then you get 10 minutes to prepare kind of a business plan, and then 10 minutes to present to a judge. And so it really helps you sharpen your speech and debate skills, but also applying it in a business context. So you learn a lot about, marketing or accounting or finance through studying for the exams as well.
So there's one question here. 藤校学费基础 So the tuition fee for the university college is based on your family income, or is not by your family income?
Yeah, so for a lot of the top universities in the US, they have really wonderful financial aid, which is based on family income. And so you can apply for that simultaneously with when you're applying to get your admissions. And so they do base it on family income.
It's basically, so how likely you can get a full scholarship for the US schools?
I'm not sure what the threshold is, but they say it's need-based. So they'll evaluate everything from your savings to your income to the number of dependents. If you're the only person in university at the time in your family, or if you have siblings applying, they consider everything.
So then one question is, so they took the ACT test and took another 2 SAT. Is that good enough to showcase your academic achievement?
Yeah, so I guess that's a good point too, which is different students have different strengths going into university. And so while some might get in on their academic skills, I don't think that was ever my strength. I had good grades and I had good test scores, but really what allowed me to stand out was my extracurriculars and my leadership positions. And so I think when you're thinking about university applications, you have to think holistically beyond academics, grades, and tests. Those are kind of necessary but insufficient, as in they are necessary to have, but you need something on top of that to really stand out and get into these universities nowadays.
I guess there's one really relevant question here. So it's how important that grade 10 or grade 11 summer camp in university application? I
would say they're only important if they give you a meaningful experience to discuss in your personal essays. So the way that they might come through on your application is either in your activities section or in your personal essays. And so if you have a really interesting grade 10 and 11 summer, then you can write about that in your essays, but otherwise it'll be in your activity list. And so you don't have to write about your grade 10, 11 summers in your essays. You could write about another meaningful experience. I just think people put emphasis on grade 10, 11 summers because that's when a lot of those experiences happen, and a lot of people choose to use that as content for their essays.
So what advice do you have? What advice do you have on time management in high school? You know, you have to attend. You like to attend various activities, right? And obviously, you have to manage your time very well. So how can you do that?
I would say in grade 9 and 10 to prioritize trying a lot of different things and just constantly reflecting on if they're a good use of your time, if you're enjoying them, if you're learning from them, and if not, to, I guess, deprioritize it for something else. And then in grade 11 and 12, that's when you want to start focusing in your time and kind of choosing maybe like 2 or 3 main areas to devote your time. And then that becomes more of like a quality over quantity decision. But for me, I used to, I think, study a lot at school. So after school ended, I would go with friends to the library and do coursework, and make time for extracurriculars after school. But yeah, I think it'll come naturally, I guess.
Come naturally. Okay.